I didn't know a lot about the Red Pill going in. I'd been hearing bits and pieces about a documentary coming out about the men's rights movement, but I hadn't been following it closely. I figured I'd hear about it when it was available, and boy did I hear about it. Feminists managed to use an online petition to get the initial venue for the Australian premiere to cancel, and the group hosting the event had a terrible time trying to find a new venue, with most saying they didn't want to show controversial material and attract the attention of detractors. It was all through the Australian media, the Streisand effect in full force. Eventually, thanks to a fundraising campaign and a lot of generosity, a venue was found and the screening given the go-ahead. Because of the drama and various threats of protest and silencing of the event, the security was tight. I'm talking really tight. We got texted the general area and meet-up place on the morning of the event, then the meet-up place changed again in the afternoon. We had to meet at the location, identify ourselves and get checked off, and then be walked in small groups down alleyways and side streets to the venue, where there were burly security men waiting outside. The whole thing had turned into a logistical nightmare. I felt like I was in a spy movie, waiting at the train station where we were to meet, eyeing people off, making eye contact, wondering if they were there for the same reason, counting the number of times people walked by, to think about whether they were loitering or not. It was comical, really. I was telling myself, okay, look, just because that guy has walked past twice, is wearing cargo pants and has a beard, doesn't mean he's an MRA. Stop with the stereotyping. Eventually I found them. As we were moving to the venue, I really got hit by how ridiculous this all was. Here I was, in Australia, sneaking around like a criminal to see a documentary people don't want me to be allowed to see. This would be crazy no matter what the documentary was. In history classes, I've watched Hitler speeches, communist propaganda videos, anti-black and anti-gay hate material. I was never considered too weak-minded to watch these and think critically about them. Trust the feminists to be the one to see me that way. I didn't know what to expect from the crowd. They were predominantly male, but I was pleased to see a very wide age range. A lot of young guys as well as middle-aged men and older gentlemen. They were all lovely, warm and kind, and the whole event had good vibes, for want of a better term. A young guy came up to me, introduced himself, and asked me what made me want to come and see the film. I asked him the same. He told me that he's from Singapore and just thought it so crazy to see so much censorship happening in Australia, a place he once thought was at least semi-free. He commented on how dishonest and tightly controlled the media is here. He also noted that in Asia, he had seen the tremendous human suffering and the conditions people live in, and contrasted that with Australia, where well-off, well-educated young people complain endlessly about oppression and play the victim. I really enjoyed chatting to people and overhearing snapshots of the conversations over drinks. People were talking about politics, gender, the media. They were laughing and joking. It kind of felt like watching my Twitter timeline clicking over. There were women too. I spent much of the night with two women I met, one a young mother of 3, the other a 60-something worker. Both called themselves feminists, although they didn't like the lengths modern feminism has gone to. The younger woman spoke about safe schools and her concerns over the way society wants to teach her sons their masculinity is bad. She described her difficulties giving opinions that go against the mainstream on Facebook or with friends. The older woman spoke about how intolerant the young people in her workplace are, refusing to hear opposing opinions, and how they can't be joked with, constantly walking on eggshells. She described today's feminism as taking away from the work of the feminists of the past, and yet both had fairly mainstream views. They were pretty indicative to me of the normal feminists, who are unaware of or disapproving of much of what is being done in their name. There were women, thankfully, although I wish there were more. Not because of my gender equality, but because I think it is powerful for women to stand with men on men's rights issues. And I also think a lot of women will relate to the film itself, since it was made from a woman's perspective. Again, this isn't a sentimental women's point of view thing. First of all, women make up many of those that really, really need to hear these things, since they're more likely to have been lied to by feminism. But secondly, Cassie's personal journey through the making of this film resonated so deeply with me as an anti-feminist woman. She begins this film as a feminist, making a documentary about the men's rights movement. She begins to realize they have good points, and an internal struggle happens, played out in her video diaries on screen. She speaks of how the new perspective she is seeing causes her to push even more into feminism, to try to remind herself why she is a feminist, to avoid falling off the cliff or down the rabbit hole and turning to the other side. We see the conflict in her mind as she becomes more and more aware. Watch her cry as she thinks on what she's learned. There are so many things I want to say about the film, but I also don't want to ruin it. Not in the sense of spoilers, obviously, but in the sense of impact. I knew very little about this film going in, and even though none of the information contained in the documentary was new to me, it was put together in a way that really packed a punch. I cried more than once. I felt immense compassion. I worried about all the men that I love. I regained my anger at the state of things for men in the world. The film explored all sorts of things, with a focus on custody battles and paternity fraud, and male victims of domestic violence, as well as workplace deaths, male suicide and mental health, circumcision, and other things. The core of the men's rights activists' concerns, the disposability of men in today's world, as war fodder, as workers of dangerous and undesirable jobs, as fathers. There was nothing in this film that was particularly controversial or one-sided. It was not propaganda. It wasn't even pushing an agenda as such. This is a film by a feminist who realised as she was making the documentary that her subjects were speaking truth. She interviews feminists throughout, not the low-hanging fruit of the internet, but professors in gender studies and editors of feminist magazines. Their statements, contrasted with the concerns of the men being interviewed, seem obscenely frivolous. They are deeply angering in their selfishness and lack of compassion. So, what was all the fuss about? I really have no idea, but I wish people would be able to see it and judge for themselves. I'd love this to be on TV, on Netflix, in cinemas, all over, even on YouTube. I'll be buying a copy for basically everyone I know. Even people who think they will disagree with this should see it and at least open the conversation. You might be surprised. If you get the opportunity, I'd really like to encourage you to see it.